Okay, so Velketor the Sorcerer lore. Obviously, we know Velketor the Sorcerer created what we know as Velk's Labyrinth, right? It's this huge maze-like structure where there is like a kobold village, there's an ice Afridi, and there are all of these creations that are like living ice. And there's a big castle, and inside that castle we have none other than Velketor the Sorcerer himself. So, Velk is the most powerful Kromzek sorcerer to have ever lived, as far as we know, at least since the fall of the Relosian Empire. But he was banished, he was condemned into exile by King Tormax and the rest of the Kromzek society. So we have to ask, why did this happen? Now, we know his motivation since he's been banished has been to return to Kael, depose King Tormax, and take over the city for himself, right? He wants to be the king now. But we really don't know what got him there. However, if we look at Velk's loot table, it gives us a little bit of a hint here. So check it out. We have two items I want to draw your attention to immediately. The Bone Bracelet of Condemnation and the Bone Ring of Condemnation. So both of these items are Necromancer only, okay? Now, also we have the Silver Sword of Yao Rek. Keep this in mind. So, Velk has items designed for each one of the casters, right? There's like a Mage-only item, Necromancer-only item, Chanter-only item, and Wizard-only item. But we're really interested in those Necromancer items because if you look at Kael, when Velius came out, there were no other Shadow Knight or Necromancer mobs there, with the exception of one, a visiting noble, aka someone who's not from around there. I don't know, where he's from, but he's the only Shadow Knight in the zone. Instead, we actually see a lot of clerics and a few paladins in the zone. So it gives us an idea that maybe Necromancy was not kosher in Kael for whatever reason. Maybe that was just something they weren't cool with. Now, we look at the Silver Sword of Yao Rek. There's not much of any other mention in EQ about this Yao Rek character. But what I did find was there are, way later in the Everquest timeline, there's another spell that is related to Yao Rek. And what it does is, as a mage spell, it summons you a bag full of weaponry. All the weapons are silver weapons. It's like silver longsword of Yao Rek, silver axe of Yao Rek, this kind of thing. So we associate silver weaponry. The first thing that jumps to your mind probably is fighting werewolves, right? Because werewolves are traditionally in fantasy seen as weak to werewolves, but it's also associated often with fighting undead and things like that. So we can almost hazard a guess that this Yao Rek was maybe a paladin, right? There's not much in the way of werewolves on Velius, but there is one, Olvar, which is a were-being of sorts, Garu, and he's considered a huge threat to like the Gnolls and Iceclad. So there might be something there. But the point we're looking at here is that the sword of Yao Rek, Yao Rek's sword, right? He's not going to give it up. It's in possession of Velkator. So we think he's maybe a paladin. Velk has his sword, and Velk has items which imply he has dabbled in the arts of necromancy, which we already have circumstantial evidence is frowned upon in Storm Giant, Frost Giant society. So here's what I think happened. I think as Velk was exploring all the elements of magic, he started looking into necromancy in secret. I think this Yao Rek person discovered him. I think to try to hide it and not let it get out, a battle ensued. I think Velk killed Yao Rek, one of his Storm Giant brethren, stole his sword, and then was promptly discovered, right? Because it's kind of hard to hide something like that in such a small society. And then he was permanently banished. He was condemned, like his Bone Bracelet of Condemnation, his Bone Ring of Condemnation. He was condemned into exile for the rest of his life. Now, you might wonder, like, how do we know that Yao Rek was really a Frost Giant at all? He could have been just like some other dude, right? Maybe it was an adventurer, and Velk killed that adventurer and took his sword. Well, the name Yao Rek is very reminiscent of a bunch of other Frost and Storm Giants in the zone. Specifically, that last three-letter bit, Rek, with a preceding bit, is used frequently with higher tier Storm Giant names. A lot of Storm Giant nobles and wizards in particular have that Rek name. And furthermore, almost every mob that drops a silver item in Kael is some form of noble or some form of sorcerer. Even the guard that stands next to King Tormax himself, right? He's got two guards. One of those guards is Irek, Bloodfist, Maybe it's Yao Rek's brother, who knows? But it points to this person definitely being a storm giant based on circumstantial evidence. And we have, I think, a good theory on why Velk was potentially banished. Now, let's look at some of the other items he has, right? He's got the Crystal Crown of Confusion and the Crystal Rod of Confusion. These are enchanter items, but the idea of a crown and a rod, these are things which are almost exclusively associated with royalty, particularly rulers or kings. So there's already a king in Kael. I don't think he's looking for a second king to show up. But if Velk wanted to be king and he was discovered to have that ambition, that could be another reason that he was ousted. Or maybe since he has been exiled, since he's been condemned to living his days alone in his caverns, that's when his desire to become king came about. But it's a rod in a crown of confusion. So there might be an element of madness going on with Velk. Maybe all his years in isolation away from his kin and all his deep studies of magics have begun to drive him mad. It's not confirmed anywhere in the lore. We don't really get a lot more information on Velk, but just piecing it together from the items that are available from Velk's loot table, this is the best I've come up with. So I'm interested to see what you guys think of that theory, but that's my theory on what happened to Velk.